What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a quick review for House of the Dragons episode 2, The Rogue Prince. I'm a bit late with this week got quite busy, but I'll try to get these videos out sooner during the week. But if you haven't seen, I did my discussion videos with Jake, one on his channel and one on my channel again this week, so check those out and let's get right into the short review here. At the start of this episode we immediately get the new intro, which I personally like quite a bit. I have a breakdown video for it if you want to know what exactly is happening in this particular intro. I enjoy it. I don't mind that they reuse the music, even though a lot of people have mixed opinions about that, but personally I enjoyed that aspect. I won't go too much into it here. If you want more detail on that, go to that other video where I broke down the whole thing. Let's get into what this episode is called. It's called The Rogue Prince. It's obviously named after Daemon Targaryen. And personally, I thought for an episode that's named The Rogue Prince, it's actually not very focused on Daemon. Like, Daemon is a looming threat throughout the episode, but really I feel like the heart of this episode is Rhaenyra. So I funnily joked that I want to do an unofficial petition to rename this episode to The Realm's Delight, which is Rhaenyra's nickname, obviously. It's just a joke, but I feel like Rhaenyra stole this episode. I think Millie Alcock playing Rhaenyra did an incredible job at getting us through this episode, through all the emotions that Rhaenyra is facing. We start off like 6 months after episode 1, where it's been 6 months since Rhaenyra has been named the heir, and we see the fallout of it, that her life is still quite similar, that even though she is the heir now, she doesn't really have a lot of influence in terms of politics. We see how, she's belittled over and over again by the council, by her father, and they don't seem to take her that seriously. And then we also get to see how Rhaenys, the queen who never was, kind of gives her this reality check that, hey, you're kind of a placeholder, right? Like, whenever your father remarries and whenever he's going to have a son, people are going to expect that son to be the new heir. So I think it's a very Rhaenyra focused episode, even though it's called The Rogue Prince. I thought Millie Alcock did an amazing job at getting all the emotions across. We saw her be belittled, we saw her be defiant, we saw her be very vulnerable, we saw her be a badass in this episode, and we saw her be betrayed at the end of this episode. And I thought Millie Alcock really brought all of those emotions to life, and I think it was done immensely well. My favorite scenes in this, even though I love that bridge scene with Rhaenyra and Daemon, my favorite scenes were actually the scene in the set with Rhaenyra and Alicent, where Rhaenyra got super emotional, and it was interesting to see this vulnerable side of Rhaenyra. And my other favorite scene was her talk with Rhaenys. And I think in that, really, the back and forth there and their dynamic was really interesting to explore. And I'm really looking forward to see how that particular relationship will unfold over the course of the show. So Rhaenyra, in my opinion, clearly the best performance in this particular episode. I also really loved her conversations with her father, like Viserys. Obviously, they're having a very hard time communicating since Emma's death in episode 1. So I thought those scenes were very well done, and obviously those build to a very interesting conclusion towards the end of the episode. We see how Rhaenyra is once again not tricked, but kind of betrayed by not just her father, but also her best friend. And once again, Millie Alcock's performance in that particular scene also almost perfect, I would say. Other than Rhaenyra, I think the other main focus of this episode was Viserys and him trying to find a new wife. And we see how he's kind of fighting with this, that he isn't really sure whether he really wants to remarry, but we obviously have the setup for him marrying Alicent from last episode, but in this episode, Laena Velaryon is brought forward as another option, and we really see him struggle to kind of make that decision. And obviously the scene with Laena, very uncomfortable. It was one scene that I wasn't a big fan of, because I feel like putting a child actress in that particular scene and having her say the things that she had to say to Viserys in that scene was quite uncomfortable. And it's something where I talked with it about Jake in our discussion, that I do feel like it's maybe a bit hypocritical of me to kind of feel that way about this, because in the books obviously it's the same situation, but I feel like seeing it brought to life and actually seeing a child have to say those lines was a bit too much. But it's a small nitpick. Like, I still really like this episode, but it was something where I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I like that they're making this child actor say this particular thing. But overall, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the second half of that scene, I really loved the first half. It set up Lena very well. We see her talk about dragons, ask about Valerian and Vhagar, and I thought that particular part of the conversation with Viserys was done very well. And one really good thing, I think, even though that scene was uncomfortable, it was supposed to be uncomfortable, right? And I think the way Paddy Considine really reacted to Lena's dialogue in that scene actually also showed how uncomfortable Viserys himself was. So I think in that sense, like, the scene did what it had to do. We see throughout this episode how Viserys is trying to make this decision about who to marry, whether he should actually marry Lena, who would be the better choice politically speaking. And he's having a hard time, and we see him discuss it with Corlys, with Rhaenys. We see him discuss it with Otto and Mellos. We see him discuss it with Lionel Strong. We see him discuss it with Alicent even, and then we even see him discuss it with Rhaenyra towards the end. So I think this episode does a really good job to show like how conflicted Viserys is about this proposal with Lena, and obviously it all builds up to the twist at the end that he didn't choose Lena, he chooses Alicent. And yeah, I just loved that scene at the very end where it was really nice to see how it was played out. I do have a small issue with that scene where I'm like, Alicent is at the small council meeting and nobody's asking any questions like, why is she there? Like, Rhaenyra acts like she's super surprised that Alicent is supposed to marry Viserys, but like she never asked why Alicent is there in the first place. Again, small nitpick, like it's not a big deal. Obviously they just had her there because they wanted to have the looks between Rhaenyra and Alicent, so I get why they had her there. I just wish there was an actual explanation why she was there and why nobody else was asking questions why she's there. But again, the dynamic between Rhaenyra and Alicent from here on out will be really interesting. I think they did a good job to set up their friendship in episode 1 with their scenes, and then in episode 2 with their scene in the Sept. And at the very end, the look that passed between them, with Rhaenyra being feeling super betrayed, and then with Alicent kind of looking like she felt ashamed and super conflicted about what just happened. Yeah, I think it's a good setup to I think it's a really good setup for the rest of the season to see how this particular relationship will develop. And I think this will really be the heart of this series, to kind of see how these two women and, yeah, their friendship, how it kind of evolves throughout everything that's happening, politically speaking. And then the third thing I really want to talk about is Daemon, the Rogue Prince, who this episode is named after. And I really enjoyed his scene. I really liked the whole egg thing. I loved the bridge scene. I liked his scene with Miss Arya afterwards. One issue I had with the bridge scene is basically the setup, like the fact that Otto goes there without seemingly having a plan, which I talked again with Jake about it in our discussion, but I'm still not super convinced that Otto would really do that, because it feels like a very risky move, and it doesn't feel like he trusts Daemon enough to kind of behave in that kind of scene, and him putting himself at risk like that is a bit of a thing where I'm like, would Otto and a character like Otto really do this? Yeah, but that's, again, it's a nitpick, but I think that's actually my biggest actual issue in this episode, where I feel like the scene is epic, like this actual scene with Rhaenyra intervening and then her conversation with Daemon is so intense. So I think the payoff was worth it, but I wish the setup was a bit better, where, yeah, it made a bit of more sense, because I asked myself what would happen if Rhaenyra did not intervene, because obviously Otto didn't know that Rhaenyra would show up there. So what was his plan afterwards? Like, how would that scene have played out if Rhaenyra didn't show up? And I really don't have a good answer for that question, where I'm like, would Otto just be like, okay, never mind, I'm going to go home, Daemon, sorry. So it's just something, again, it's a small thing, but I wish these kind of small things wouldn't happen, because then the show would be near perfect. So overall, I think this episode for me is an 8 out of 10, which is slightly worse than episode 1. I loved episode 1. I think episode 1 had some scenes that really made me emotional that I'm still rewatching, like especially that last scene of episode 1 is, yeah, probably my favorite scene still in this whole series. But I think this episode did a good job of building up the characters further, and setting up a lot of the plot lines that we will see unfold throughout the series. So I'm quite happy with it. Yeah, and I think the setup it did for the next episode with the crab feeder is really good, and I'm really looking forward to see episode 3 that's about to come out in about 3 hours from when I'm recording this. So yeah, I'm trying to get this video out as soon as possible. So yeah, once again, sorry that this is coming out so late. I got quite busy this week, but yeah, as I said, in the next week I'll try to get these videos out a bit sooner. Yeah, but that's all from my side for today. Let me know how you felt about episode 2 in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.